Hey, Ms. Blackman here to talk to you today about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay, so Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in 1932 as a Democratic candidate. A Democratic candidate hadn't been elected for a while, but the nation was in huge crisis mode. And FDR had promised change. He said, I pledge to you, I pledge to myself a new deal for the American people. And that's what people wanted. They were in the Great Depression, in the midst of the Great Depression. And the Great Depression was quite horrible. 25% of the nation was unemployed, 5,000 banks had closed. And if a bank closed, there was no measure to protect your money that was in the bank. So people just lost their savings, which was devastating. And 2 million people were homeless. Corporate profits had fallen by 90%. And then also farm prices had fallen by 60%. So people weren't making money. Companies weren't making money, which is why there was huge unemployment. And then also farmers weren't making money. No one was making any money. And yeah, it was quite horrible. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt came in with this New Deal, and the New Deal included 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. And that was his plan: to provide immediate relief for the people, to recover the economic systems that had been damaged, and finally to reform the economy so that a Great Depression never happened again. And so he was intense about this. But the first thing that he had to do was try to regain the people's confidence. And actually, he's going to do that throughout. So he gave fireside chats, which is where he would just get on the radio and talk to the American people like he was their friend. And he would inform them about the drought in the West, the Dust Bowl, unemployment, things like that. And so he would just get on the radio and just talk. And this was monumental because no other president had the chance to do this. The radio was quite new invention, and so no other president had utilized it in this way. But it did definitely help people identify with FDR. He was criticized later for some things that we'll talk about, but for the most part, he went down as a huge legend. So let's talk more specifically about the 3 R's. So you have relief. So some programs that would be in relief are like the TVA, the FERA, the PWA, and you're like, what are all these letters? All right. So the New Deal included a lot of programs that people kind of abbreviated. And so it's known as alphabet soup because there are so many different ones. And we're not going to cover even close to all of them. We're just going to cover a few. But a few of the important ones. So relief, to provide immediate relief, you have the FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Commission. So what the FERA does is it gives money to the state and local governments. So the Federal Emergency Relief Administration granted federal money to state and local governments for operating soup kitchens and meeting the basic needs of the homeless. And then you have the PWA. This provides money to states for the construction of roads, bridges, and dams. So you're building up the infrastructure, but you're also giving people jobs. And then Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, hired young men to work on land projects. TVA, this is a huge one, transforms the Tennessee Valley region, which was really prone to flooding and malaria because of all the mosquitoes and because of the flooding. And they just kind of play off of each other. And so the TVA transforms that region by providing power plants and dams. So that way the flooding would stop and people could get electricity in this area, making it a desirable region to live in, which previously it totally wasn't. And that encompasses not only Tennessee, but 7 states in total, the states surrounding Tennessee as well. And then some recovery programs. So some things that were presented to transform the economy, or to recover the economic losses. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, was created to support public confidence in the banking system. Okay, so in regard to the banks closing, huge problem, right? So FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, shut down all the banks at once, declared a bank holiday, and just closed them all. And he only reopened those that were financially sound enough to support themselves and to stay open. And so he opened those through the Emergency Banking Act. And then they created an insurance so that way your deposits could be saved. So if the bank was in trouble, you would still be able to get your money out. And this is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And this still helps us today. This is the reason that people are confident when they put their money in the bank. Most people have a bank account and keep their money in the bank. I mean, I think it's kind of crazy to try to live without one these days, although many older people did for generations because they were scared of banks. But FDR changed that. He tried to change that by reviving the people's confidence and trust in the banks, and we still have that today. And the Agricultural Adjustment Act, farmers were granted subsidies to cut production, which would cause a rise in prices and diminish the farm crisis. So they're going to actually reduce the number of crops they produce, so that way the price of crops would go up because you have less out there. So it's a supply-demand thing, right? And then reform. An example of a reform program, something that was to change how America works so that way a Great Depression would never happen again, was the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. And it was created to regulate the stock market. The intent was to prevent another stock market crash by limiting the types of stock speculation that could be transacted. Meaning buying on margin when you're buying with credit, right? Money that you don't actually have. All right, so was the New Deal a success? You can pause and try to answer that for yourself if you'd like. It's debatable, for sure. All these programs and organizations created significant government involvement in the economic system of the U.S. This is a departure from the long history of laissez-faire, where the government was hands-off. But when you evaluate the New Deal, you have to think about the long-term and short-term effects. Programs like the CCC, the PWA, and the TVA put unemployed Americans back to work. However, most of this work was hard physical labor that only benefited young men, and it did not help groups such as women or the elderly. And the emergency banking measures and the creation of the FDIC restored public confidence, though, in American institutions, which we still have today. So that's a huge success, right? But the long-term implications of these programs were not fully realized, and since America's involvement in World War II was what really lifted the nation out of the economic crisis. So that's what historians will say the most, is that it was World War II, not the New Deal. But certainly the New Deal came up with things that did help, for sure. Okay, so that is it I have for you on the New Deal. So now you should be able to describe Roosevelt's attempts at relief, recovery, and reform as reflected in New Deal programs. And I'm going to figure out how to stop this.